This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
Welcome to the How to Run for Office podcast from My Campaign Coach. We couldn't do this podcast without support from our sponsor, Campaign Sidekick. And Sidekick is the best voter platform that you can have on the market, and it's priced at a point that makes it a no-brainer for campaigns of any size. If you need to talk to any voters at all, visit campaignsidekick.vote to find out how their best-in-breed voter contact platform can revolutionize your campaign and help you win. Elected to public office in 2014, Ellen Troxclair is the youngest woman to ever serve on the Austin City Council. In addition to her role at City Hall, she manages a successful residential real estate business and is a founding partner of the Lux Property Group. After graduating with a degree in business from the University of Texas, she began a decade-long career in public policy. In her capacity in the state capitol, she worked with constituents, local municipalities, state agencies, and interest groups in researching and developing effective policy on a vast array of issues. She played an integral role in the crafting of statewide legislation on topics such as improving our education system, assisting veterans, providing reliable water infrastructure, ensuring election integrity, and truth in budgeting and taxation. This experience gave her an appreciation for serving others and a great passion for effecting positive change at the City Hall level. She also represents the city on the Regional Affordability Committee and the Capital Area Council of Governments. Ellen and her husband Caleb live in Southwest Austin with their daughter and 2 dogs. Ellen is honored to serve as the first City Council member representing District 8 and is a true advocate for Southwest Austin, dedicated to protecting quality of life while making it affordable to live in the city that she loves. Ellen, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure. You know, we've known each other for several years, you and your husband, since your time back at the State House. And I'm really excited to have you on because you're somebody that, as a Politico that I've known and got to see you really grow up and mature in the city, or in the Capitol. And now you're a city council member. You went outside, you ran. It was a tough campaign. You won it and are doing just an awesome job as a conservative there in that body. And I'm really proud of the work you've done. And I'm really excited to get to hear your wisdom and bring that to our audience kind of from a younger person's perspective of how you got involved, you got active, and then you ended up running and winning your office. So that's really excited to have you on today.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I'm happy to talk about it.
Well, let's start out by kind of going back to how you got started in politics, because I know you've been involved for a long time. What got you started, to kind of talk through a little bit of that chronology?
Really, I got started because I was a student at UT and I got an email from like a listserv blast from somebody who was looking for an intern to help in their Capitol office. And so I thought, that'd be kind of cool. I'm going to go check that out. So I went and interviewed and got the internship, worked several years unpaid or for minimal pay at the Capitol, kind of learning the ropes.
Right.
And just, really fell in love with public policy and, feeling like you were having an impact on what was going on in the state. So so I kind of moved up the ranks, eventually got hired as a legislative aide and then a director, and then ultimately ended up serving as chief of staff for a couple of different representatives, Betty Brown, Wayne Christian, and most recently Jason Isaac. And so I was working for Jason when the Austin City Council went through a little bit of a transformation. We were previously an at-large system, so everybody in the city voted for every single seat, which led to really a concentration of power downtown and really only one kind of ideological viewpoint represented on the council. And so I thought, well, this is an opportunity for Southwest Austin to elect somebody who is going to be more in line with what my husband and I believe and really represent us. But of course, it never occurred to me that I was going to be that person. I never wanted to run for office.
Right.
So we put together some money pooled some money with some friends and said, hey, let's check out who's running. We'll pick somebody that we like and be able to give them a little bit of money to start out with. And through that process, realized that there was nobody that we were really excited about. There was nobody talking about cost of living or responsible spending and property taxes and all these things that I really felt like were at a tipping point in Austin. So Eventually I said, I guess if I have the ability to run and I don't, then I can't complain about it. So
Absolutely.
kind of happened really quickly. We were right up against the filing deadline, and I called Representative Isaac and asked him to meet me at a Starbucks and to get his thoughts on it. And we talked for about an hour before. And he was so supportive, so enthusiastic. He's like, "Yeah, go for it." And then after about an hour, I realized, well, Jason, that's a full-time job that I wouldn't be able to continue to serve as your chief of staff. And he didn't realize that, because in so many cities the city council is a part-time job. So of course that kind of put a whole new twist on our conversation. But he
on
was
second
actually,
thought, but maybe we shouldn't do this.
yeah. No, but to his credit, he was so amazingly supportive, even though it meant that we wouldn't be able to work together anymore. And without his support, I'm not sure that I would have been able to do it. So I'm very grateful for that.
No, he's a solid guy, and definitely somebody that I've enjoyed watching on the campaign trail and down the state house. And you did great work for him. I definitely feel sorry for him losing you as his chief of staff, but that's pretty awesome of him to be so supportive, in spite of the fact that he knew he'd be, or at least after the second half of the conversation, realized he'd be losing his rock star chief. So that's, kudos to Jason on that.
Yeah.
So you decided you were going to run. It was, you're up against a filing deadline. And you'd run campaigns before, right? You'd actually run at least one of Jason's.
Yeah, I guess that's right. I mean, I was honestly never super involved in the political side or the campaign side of things. I guess when I'm trying to remember now, when I worked for Jason, because his district was so close, I did do a lot of work on his campaign, and he was really a great mentor and a great example of what it takes to run for office. You have to be so committed and have such an amazing work ethic. You have to be, you can't just depend on, volunteers are there's so many, fundraising is critical, volunteers are critical, but without the candidate being the most dedicated person to winning that election, you're not going to be successful. And he absolutely understood that. And he was the hardest worker on the campaign. He was out block walking, before everybody else showed up and after everybody else was done for the day. So that was a really good lesson for me to kind of take going forward, as someone who had zero name ID in my district running for city council, did not know the right people when it came to city politics. I certainly, knew plenty of people at the state level, but it's just a whole different interest groups.
Oh yeah.
Whole different funding streams, et cetera. So as someone who really didn't know how little I knew going into my city council race, it was good to have that example set for me and know that, once I was committed, I was going to do it 100%.
Well, you knew at that point from watching Jason that it took a lot of hard work, and you were dedicated to that. You knew you're signed up for it, at least on that level. How did you go about building this campaign plan? One of the nice things about your time there in the Capitol is you knew a lot of people who had run campaigns before, and you had a lot of people that knew you well, knew you were a strong conservative who would fight for free market policies, for keeping things affordable there in South Austin, and a number of those things you mentioned already. So you had a lot of that network, but like you said, it wasn't in the typical power nexus around City Hall. How did you go about building your campaign strategy and getting that thing off the ground?
Well, I was really fortunate to have some amazing volunteers kind of from the get-go. I accepted a couple of speaking, I reached out to kind of the local political clubs, and they had me come speak right away to their membership. And there were a few people who kind of had never been really involved in political campaigns before, but something about me or my race, sparked them to really get involved. So that was so critical and so amazing that I had a handful of, probably 3, 4, 5 volunteers from the very beginning who spent a lot of time and energy helping me. I was the only person in the race I was the only person in the race. I had 4 other opponents, so 5 people total. And we were running, there's no primary because it's a nonpartisan position in Austin. So we were on the general election ballot in November. And I think I was the only one without a campaign consultant. And really, I was just kind of able to rely on my own experience, like you said, kind of being involved in politics for a while. And I think that came off really genuinely. I mean, I think that people could tell that I was really passionate, that I was doing this for the right reasons, that I was really passionate about it, and I wasn't like at some. I think on one hand, like maybe not being as polished or not being perfect or not knowing the exact right thing to say all the time and just kind of really speaking from the heart and speaking off the top of my head went a long way for people to think, this person, this person's really talking about what I believe in, and I think she's really genuine and coming from the right place. But that said, I did put a lot of energy in kind of building my campaign list and making sure that I was using a good platform for keeping track of what voters to target, what they said when I went and knocked on their door. So I knew that this was going to be, I knew that with 5 people in the race, nobody was going to get 50%. And that we were going to go to a runoff. So my goal obviously was to make it into the runoff and to know exactly who to target to get people back out to vote once that happened. Which I think is which I think is really, really important in these kinds of races, because actually just recently there was another city council member who she got 48% of the vote in the general election and went to runoff. The next person behind her I think had 20-something%, and the person with 20% beat her. Beat her by a landslide in the runoff, because I mean, probably, I don't know why, but obviously the people who came out to vote for her the first time and didn't make it back out to the polls the second time. And so you really need to have that kind of forethought from the beginning of your campaign to know to be putting those lists together.
Yeah, when you're in those kind of situations where it's going to be a runoff or it could be a runoff situation, you have to already be thinking about going all the way to that runoff date, because turning out people the first time, that just gets you to the finals.
Right.
And if you don't have the plan for how you're going to know who your people are and turn them out effectively for your runoff, then it's not going to matter. Right.
Yep. That's exactly right. And I stayed on message. I ran on there were other people in the race that were that were running on transportation platforms or that talked about affordability, but really I really tried to own the affordability conversation and the cost of living conversation, because really that is what motivated me to run for office. And I think that struck a chord in a lot of people who are struggling with the constant increases with being able to live here. So I tried to stay on message and didn't get distracted by everything, by other things that people were bringing up, or things that sometimes I wanted to respond to things and nope, that's not on my message. They can go say whatever they want to say. I'm gonna stick to my kind of game plan and my message. And the other thing that was kind of unique about my race is that in Austin there's a $350 campaign contribution limit per person. So, to raise a decent amount of money, you have to talk to a lot of people who are willing to give you
yes, you do.
You can't depend on kind of that handful of really big donations. There was no $10,000 donation in my race. Right. So,
did you have a budget that you were shooting for to fund at the beginning, or how did that evolve?
I think somebody asked, I think somebody who I was asking for money wanted to see a budget. And so I put one together, but I just made it all up because I had no idea. I mean, I had no idea what it took to run a city council race, and neither did anybody else, because like I said, this was a transition to a new system. So right. Even looking back at previous campaign filings, they were running citywide in a city of 800,000 people, and my district had 80,000 people. So when you're talking about direct mail, there was no point in going on TV. There wasn't, it's just a different strategy when you have, when you have a smaller target audience. So there was no data, there was no historical background for me to look at to know how much it was going to take to win the race. So I kind of just thought, well, my budget is as much as I can raise.
Right. Well, and you had, like I said, you were in a unique position there. You didn't have those traditional areas where you could go and research to identify, okay, this is the exact number, the exact amount that most people spend in these contested races. You had it was a whole new ball game. You could, I'm assuming, look and see like what your voter universe would be based on past municipals, but you didn't have a way
right.
to translate that easily over into the dollar side.
Well, that's another, you mentioned the voter universe. This was the first time that we were having city council elections in November instead of in May.
Oh my gosh, this is
So
all kinds of curveballs coming your way.
yeah, so I mean, as you know, there are a lot fewer people that turn out for a municipal election in May than turn out for the presidential election. So there was a lot of new dynamics, including, I mentioned that it's not. I think in May, a lot of local elections they don't have anything partisan on the ballot. Well, in November, people are going to vote for the president, and a lot of people vote straight ticket. And I had to stand out at the polls, kind of reminding people as they were going in to vote. Remember, hey, I'm Ellen Troxclair, I'm running for Austin City Council. It's a nonpartisan race. Make sure you get it all the way to the bottom of the ballot. Don't if you vote straight ticket, make sure you get all the way to the bottom of the ballot and vote in this race as well. So yeah, all kinds of. It was really fun. And looking back on it, actually, that was kind of one of my favorite parts of the campaign was, I picked the highest voter turnout location and stood there pretty much for the entire 2 weeks of early voting and on election day, all day, every day, talking to every single person who was going in to buy milk who may or may not be planning on voting. So it was at a Randall's, at a grocery store.
Wow. So just for the listener to understand this, so basically everything was different, in this election. Every previous one there had been for Austin. You're actually working on a per district rather than an at-large seat. You're in a November election versus a May election. You've got higher turnout because you was in 14, right? Is that when you're
right? So
you're up against you have the governor and everybody else is running on that from all the way from the top of the ballot down. So you have statewide elected officials, you have state legislative officials, you have county level partisan officials, and there you are down at the very bottom of the ballot, right next to the precinct chairs, right. And you've got tons of people showing up who would not normally be in your target universe. So whereas, like for city council here in Fort Worth, I might say, hey, we're gonna have 5,000 or 6,000 people in a district. You could look at that and say, here are the people that typically turn out to vote in a general election. Well, that's a huge number of people throughout your district. That changes everything. So this is a very, very tough race for you to come into, knowing all these dynamics are different. So you're really trying to have to make up this game plan as you go.
Yeah, and I was definitely the underdog going in. There were kind of the typical, I guess, Austin, the consultants and the things who ran Austin under the previous setup were also involved in my race, and I definitely think that they were laughing at me at the beginning, thinking, "Oh, this person came out of nowhere, doesn't file it at the last minute, has no idea what she's doing," but what, we were quick learners, and like I said, we were genuine. Another tip, I think that in these local races with low name ID, I really feel like yard signs make a big difference. I know that I don't know how other people feel about yard signs, but that was a tip that somebody gave me when I was first running. They said, make it your goal. Every single door that you knock on, every single person that you call, your end goal is to, yes, get their vote, but to be able to put a sign in their yard. And that kind of changed. It kind of changed the way that I approached my conversations when I was talking to voters. And I made sure to always ask, if they said that they were going to support me, I would say, hey, do you mind if I come drop off a sign in your yard? Because if people, they live on a street with 20 other people that have to drive by that sign every single day, and they get to the ballot, they get to the poll, and they don't really know who they want to vote for, but they know that so and so down the road is supporting Ellen Troxclair. I think that really helps to kind of raise your name ID and to get people to mark your name at the poll as well.
Well, and it helps because one of the most important things for voters is to believe that the person they're voting for is someone like them. And when they see people like them that live on the same street as they do, that have these signs that are obviously supporting and in a public way, that helps build that connection. It's a positive association. It gets your name in their head, and it gives at least a very small subconscious inkling to them that this person is someone that's like me.
Right.
And that's I'm also somebody that can be dubious about yard signs at some points, but on the municipal level, when you don't have any name ID, that's something you absolutely should work hard on. Getting those things out there, every chance you get for a supporter to increase their level of support, whether it's a $2 donation, a $5 donation, a yard sign, an endorsement, whatever you can do to increase that level of support is huge.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not sure that a Hillary or a Trump yard sign in your yard is really going to truly change somebody's mind, right? Or a Wendy Davis or a Greg Abbott sign. But when it's a local election, or when name ID really kind of matters, then I think they're important.
Absolutely. So from there, so you've put together some sort of budget. You're shooting for, trying to raise as much money as you can with those very low donation limits. You're out there. So were you knocking a bunch of doors and out there yourself and with volunteers as well?
Yes, absolutely. Every single weekend I would be knocking on doors. And some of the volunteers who would prefer to do it during the day on the weekdays, I would give them lists and they would go knock on doors on weekdays as well. We would have phone banks during the week, from, I don't know, 6 to 9 or so. We would get a bunch of people in the same room and have them use their cell phones to phone bank. What else were we doing? I mean, we did end up doing several mail pieces that I think were helpful, especially kind of towards the end of the election. I spoke at probably 20 forums. Everybody was excited about having, a specific representative from this area. So a lot of HOAs, a lot of just neighborhood organizations had all of the candidates to come speak to their group. So it was actually really time consuming, but but it was a good way to, get in front of the voters, and have kind of more personal conversations with people. And we just, spent every person that I talked to, every minute of the day, I tried to spend kind of doing something that would earn me a vote. And ultimately, and then standing in line or standing out in the parking lot at Randall's was fun too, because not only did I get to see again all the people that I had talked to during the campaign, but like the random person who wasn't planning to vote. I got several people who were not. What election is going on? Yeah, city council. And I talked to them for a few minutes and they went, I don't know who else they voted for, if they voted for anybody else, but they came out and said, hey, I voted for you. So
I love it.
So that, I think, a combination of all those things. And, so I went, there were 5 of us in the race, like I said, I was the furthest to the right, even though it was nonpartisan, I was kind of furthest to the right. And the guy who was furthest to the left, we were the two that ended up making it into the runoff, which I think surprised a lot of people, because my district is very split, pretty much 50-50. Actually, it's slightly more Democrat. And so people assumed that a moderate would win, or at least make the runoff. And ultimately, it was the people who kind of were most passionate about a specific platform that they were advocating for. The two of us were the ones that made the runoff. And then I won. Like I said, it was a Democrat district, so it was I had to convince a lot of fiscally conservative Democrats to vote for me. And in the runoff, I won by 57 votes. It was the slimmest margin in history. So I did come in first in the general election by a pretty good margin. But like I said, that really, that was such a good lesson, because every person that I talked to after that, I mean, not only did I feel like, wow, I needed every single person that I talked to over the past 6 months to make this happen. But the people who worked on my campaign also felt like, man, I really made a difference. That 3 hours that I spent making phone calls for Ellen, Bunko Club that I went to and talked about Ellen, like, those were people that really made it, everybody kind of felt really invested in the result.
Well, I've talked a lot here on the podcast about my first time getting involved in an election. That was when I was 10 years old, and we lost by 12 votes. It was one of those things where my takeaway, even as a 10-year-old, was that if you'd have told me it was be that close, I could have found 13 people. Even as a 10-year-old, I knew that. Right. And sadly, I got to be on the opposite side of what you and your folks experienced there. Right. But the fact is that you want to be able to look yourself in the mirror before those election totals come in and be able to know I did everything I could. Right. And you guys obviously knew that you needed every single vote when that came in. 57, that's a tight margin. Yeah. Yep. And so that, I think that's absolutely the right mindset, that anybody who's thinking about running for office, that's the mindset that you have to have, that every day when you wake up, that if it's election day and you're going to lose by 5 votes or by 10, however many votes, and then you have to go out and get those votes that day. So. And I think one of the most important things that you've highlighted here is that the candidate has to be the driver. So in a lot of cases, the candidate, especially if they have some money, they like to think that they can hire and do less themselves. They can hire people to go knock doors. They can hire people to do the mailers and the social media, and that's going to replace some margin of their efforts. But it couldn't be further from the truth, because as the candidate, you're the one that sets the tone for the entire campaign. Your work ethic and your drive is what's going to tell everybody else, hey, this is how hard I need to work.
Right.
And in your case, with you out there knocking doors, getting yard signs, standing at the polls, going to forums, all those activities, told every one of your volunteers and everybody that was helping out, this matters. Mm-hmm. This is going to be tight. Ellen's working her butt off, and I want to try to help out and set this tempo just like she is.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, it was, and the people who were most helpful are people who are not kind of the perennial campaign volunteers, that just go to campaign with whatever is going on. Like I don't know that any of them have volunteered for a campaign since then. So it was really awesome to have a little group that we really felt kind of that we were all in this together. And yeah, it was great. And on the financial side, we ended up spending, I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, just in case you're curious, I think that in the general, even at $350, even with the $350 limit, we spent, I believe, over $50,000. And then I think in the runoff, we spent about another $50,000 as well. So there was quite a bit of money that was spent on and I think that's reflective of how much the other candidates spent as well. So
right.
There was still quite a bit of money spent in that race. And of course, I mean, sometimes, I don't know, there's people think different things about campaign contribution limits, but there was a lot of PAC activity in my race as well. So if somebody wants to give to the candidate, but is maxed out, then, they oftentimes just go find a PAC that can support them. So that kind of complicates things, because you don't know who's giving where and what those PACs are doing.
Right. Well, I mean, that just proves, I just did some quick calculations, $50,000 at $3, even if everyone was a max out donation, which they undoubtedly were not, that's 142 people maxing out. That's still a lot of work getting those, bringing in those kind of donations. You're probably north of 200 donors at least. Mm-hmm. That's a lot of work. And it proves that you were not solely focused on one area. I often tell folks, the chief job of the candidate is to talk to voters and talk to donors. And oftentimes a candidate will find which one of those they're most comfortable with, and that's where they spend the most time. Whatever they derive the most enjoyment from, or oftentimes find the most success in, they'll lean that way. But you obviously did a really good job of doing both. I'd imagine that you had one you liked more than the other, but you still did both. How did you, was that a conscious effort on your part, or was that just kind of how things worked out given your past experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably absolutely I'm more comfortable talking with voters, and I would think that that's probably true for most candidates. It's really hard to ask someone for money, even someone that you're really comfortable with. I actually tried to kind of use the campaign contribution limit as a good thing, because I would say, like, hey, there's a limit of $350. If you're willing to, commit $350 today, then I won't beg you again for any more money until the
runoff.
So,
and then I'll be back.
Maybe some people who would have given a smaller amount, maybe it was worth it to not have to get another phone call.
Absolutely. Well, that can work in your favor if you play it like that.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to something, because the forums and kind of these public debates, those are a big factor, especially in the local elections where you have low name ID. Many
Right.
of these forums are hyper local. There's a lot of issues. You have to get to know your district very well on a precinct or neighborhood level to understand
Right.
and prepare. How did you go about getting to know your district that well and preparing specifically to go up against these 4 or 5 other people in these forums?
Well, I think the hardest thing for me about the forums, the hardest thing about the decision to run for office in the first place, was that I hate public speaking, and I was not a good public speaker. I think that I've made progress since then, just because I've had to do it so often. But that was absolutely a personal fear, that if there was any reason that I wouldn't have done this, that would have been it. And that's in fact, when I first brought it up to my husband, I said, Caleb, I think I mean, I don't know. I think that I might want to run. He said, what are you talking about? You hate public speaking. So actually that was the thing that I was most fearful about, was having to speak at those forums. And, I just, again, I just tried to, I mean, like you go speak to one neighborhood and they're concerned about, the gravel or something, the road was just repaved and they're concerned about that. And then another neighborhood doesn't know anything about that, but they want to know about what weird thing they're having, leaks in their water systems or something like that. I mean, just totally different. So, I mean, I think that by that time I had already spent, not only obviously did I live in the district, but I had spent a lot of time block walking and talking to people and already kind of getting a feel for what they cared about. And honestly, it was really being at the right place in the right time as well, because my message, because I feel like I was just genuine about what I felt like I wanted to see change in the city, and that message just happened to resonate with people. For example, it was really interesting how property tax bill. So I was kind of constantly talking about property taxes, and yes, transportation, and yes, there's other things that are important, but really it's spending and property taxes that kind of drive the success or the failure of the city. And in the middle of that, in the middle of the campaign cycle, I guess it's in September that the property tax bills came out. And so I had already been kind of on this preaching, this message for several months. But it was funny, kind of after those bills came out, all of a sudden, kind of the other candidates were starting to talk more about that as well, because people were starting to because that's what was on the top of the voters' mind.
Absolutely.
But I had already been able to kind of own that message. So, the forums were interesting. And there were times that I had to decide. I mean, there were some forums that I decided that it wasn't beneficial to go to, not because I wanted to give up the opportunity to speak to voters, but because I knew that the organization that was hosting the forum was not going to be, they didn't represent the I think what I feel like was the silent majority in my district. That they were maybe there were a lot of organizations who were used to having a lot of power in these city council elections under the at-large system, and I felt like, man, those are the that's why I'm excited about 10-1, is so that these people don't have that power, that the power is decentralized, and that we don't have to depend on whatever group it is that historically has the power to pay attention to Southwest Austin. So there were some that I kind of consciously decided, you know what, the voters that I might pick up going to this forum isn't worth it. So, but in general, I tried to accept all the invitations.
Well, that's a good policy. There are some organizations that they have an agenda that goes beyond just allowing you as a candidate and all the candidates to have an opportunity to speak to the voters. And in situations where there's a clear agenda there, in a lot of cases, it's worth just not showing up. Spend your time going talking to voters directly, talking to donors, and don't let yourself get put in a trap by going into an organization that has a clear agenda that they want to crush you. Right.
Yeah, it's not worth it. So, I mean, and sometimes, there's other candidates who love, Ted Cruz kind of comes to my mind. There's some candidates who just really thrive in that environment because they're always able to respond to kind of hostile questions in such an articulate and thoughtful manner. But I wasn't sure that I was in that place yet. So, sometimes it's just better to not put yourself in that situation.
Well, you got to know yourself and what you're good at. You got to know your own strengths, and you have to have people around you that understand those strengths as well, that can give you good advice. And knowing your husband and some of the folks that were around you, the Whites and others, you had some fantastic advisors. You had a great kitchen cabinet put together, and it sounds like you had a good appreciation for what you're good at and what you might not be good at, and you made some smart judgment calls based on those strengths and weaknesses. So kudos to you, and kudos for overcoming the public speaking fear, because that's the largest fear most people have, one of the most common ones across the country, and that's not easy to overcome. You've obviously, I don't know if you still have a fear of that sometimes, but you obviously come a long way and done very well. For somebody that's scared of it. So well done overcoming that.
Yeah, that and just being like the youngest, I guess, really young compared the youngest person who was in my race and the youngest woman who ultimately has been elected. I got a lot of comments of, well, you're too, what do you know? You're too young. And there were even groups who thought about who that was a factor in their endorsement. They thought, well, nobody's going to vote for a 20-something female. And kind of, so I would just say, I don't know if you have a lot of young people listening to this, but I would also not let age or inexperience hold you back either. I mean, if you're in it for the right reasons and you're able to articulate a message that will resonate with your voters, then it does not matter how, what your age is.
You're absolutely right. We need more younger people, especially the municipal level, running, because we're seeing so many problems that affect us in a big way. And we see, in a lot of cases, the average voter age is north of 65 when you're talking about municipal elections. Obviously different when you're talking about on a November ballot than a May ballot, but we need to have more younger people involved. And to your credit, a lot of younger people, the fact is we have the deck stacked against us if you're running for office, because there are people out there, as you mentioned, that are going to judge you negatively because of your youth. Mm-hmm. And so we have to be armed in a different way. We have to have a different mastery of how you run a campaign, as well as how you would actually govern once you're on the dais yourself. Mm-hmm. You have to know that your years in public policy, understanding complex issues and funding and budgets and affordability, obviously were a huge help. But I would imagine there were still some surprises when you actually got on the council. Talk to us a little bit about that. I know we're running short on time, but talk to us a little bit about what it was like once you got on the council, because you guys have handled some big issues. You've, as a minority voice for conservatives up there or down there in Austin, you've done some great work, but it's not easy being the minority. Talk a little bit about that.
No, yeah, you're right. It definitely hasn't been easy. And I knew that going in. I knew that this is a very liberal city, and the reason that I ran is because I didn't agree with a lot of those policies, and I didn't expect that to change overnight, but I thought it was worth it to have at least one person representing a dissenting viewpoint. So, I think that there's different measures of success. I mean, am I going to be the person that passes the most resolutions every year? Well, no, but I don't know that that's a great measure of success anyway.
No, it's not.
But do I feel like I have been able to kind of move the needle a little bit by bringing up some kind of common sense fiscal issues that really are not partisan issues? I mean, at the local level, we deal with so much zoning issues that really are affecting, the fact that it takes somebody kind of 2 years to go through a permitting process to add a bathroom to their house. I mean, that's not that kind of stuff is not partisan, and it's something that is affecting the cost of living in Austin. So I think that you just have to. It's a value decision every day that I have to make. Is this an issue that I don't agree with what's going on? How vocal do I want to be about it? Is this an issue that I'm kind of willing to, that I'm willing to kind of potentially sacrifice success in another area to speak up about, or not? And to some extent, I think I did go out of my way to put a high value on just personal relationships. I do think that every level of government would be more successful if we kind of took the time to get to know each other on a personal level, and what our families are like, and how we grew up, and all of those other things, so that you can relate. Even if you disagree on a policy issue, you can relate to them, and you can disagree respectfully. Unfortunately, I think that dynamic has changed, at least for me on the council, a little bit since the last election. I lost. Not only did I lose one other conservative colleague. We have 10 plus the mayor, so I have 11 people. There was myself and one other very conservative colleague, and he lost his election. And then with the election of Trump, and I think probably the frustration about Hillary not being elected president has really changed the dynamic on council, and it's gotten a little bit more vicious, a little bit more personal, and so that's been a struggle. But I just get encouraged by the people who I hear from every day, who I know are behind me, and who say, don't get worn down, and keep up the fight, and all of that. So I continue to think, and one of the things that I'm working, that I've been disappointed about over the past several months, is just the lack of tolerance for a differing viewpoint. Like it is okay for us to not agree on every issue. And it is okay and even valuable to be able to have a public discussion about why we think the things that we do. But there's been recently, there's kind of been a lot of discussion. Well, you shouldn't speak up about that issue, or this something, there's a lot going on at the legislature that will impact the city of Austin that I've chosen to speak out about. And they don't want me to have the ability to go to the legislature to talk about, whether it's ride sharing or short-term rentals or property taxes, things that I've been vocal about kind of since day one on council. So that's a weird dynamic. I don't know if I'm kind of getting off topic now,
you're 100% on it. Those are oftentimes dynamics that a lot of folks that run for these offices don't appreciate, don't understand, but that are going to affect them in a huge way.
Yep.
Well, Ellen, I just can't thank you enough for coming on today. We'll definitely need to have you back on at some point to talk more about your time on the council, and I really appreciate your time. Where can folks find you online if they want to reach out and find out more about what you're doing in Austin?
Yeah, you can find me on Facebook, facebook.com/Ellen Troxclair. You can find me on Twitter at Ellen for Austin. You can email me at info@ellenforaustin.com. And I personally check kind of all of those different social media and email accounts. So feel free to reach out, and I would love to continue to give anybody any advice or answer any questions that somebody might have.
I love it. Ellen, you got any last closing words of wisdom for future candidates?
Oh, I just think do it. I feel like had I known what I was up against when I made the decision to run, or even if I had a little bit more time to think about it, if I wasn't kind of up against that filing deadline, I think I probably wouldn't have done it. And because it was crazy. It was kind of a crazy harebrained idea that has since, changed the entire trajectory of my life. But I'm so glad that I didn't give myself that time to kind of chicken out and to back out, because ultimately it's been a really great experience, and I feel like I'm serving exactly the purpose that I set out to serve. So just don't let, you can conquer your fears, and don't let, whatever is your reason to not do it. Just really try to think through if it's something that can be overcome or not. And if it is, then I encourage you to just jump in.
Ellen, I love it. Thank you so much for your hard work down in Austin and being a good voice for conservatives, for the hard work that you did to get there, and all the great work you're doing now. I really appreciate you doing that and for you coming on today. I want to also say thank you to our sponsor, Campaign Sidekick. Check out the show notes for all of Ellen's contact information and the links we referenced from the show today, and we'll talk to you all again next week.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.